President Trump's war on drug trafficking getting even larger in scale, the president declaring cartels as unlawful combatants, paving the way.
What if the ghost of Mexico's most feared cartel kingpin finally stepped into the glaring light of a U.S. raid? On the night of October 7, 2025, the quiet docks of San Pedro were shattered by the roar of helicopters, the hiss of armored convoys, and the relentless shout of "Hands up!" The result? A SWAT-led operation that sent 200-plus arrests through the night and netted a staggering 5 tons of cocaine, an audacious strike that turned a sleepy harbor into an international battlefield. Stay with us as we peel back the curtain on the raid that put El Mencho's warehouse into the spotlight and explore how this massive takedown reshaped law enforcement tactics on both sides of the border. The night the world had been waiting for unfolded under a bruised pre-dawn sky that seemed to swallow the harbor whole. October 7, 2025 began with a silence that was almost conspiratorial, broken only by the piercing glow of searchlights cutting through the darkness like a series of angry eyes. Helicopters hovered above the docks, their rotors slicing the quiet air, while armored SUVs formed a steel wall around every alley and corner. Federal agents and local police marched in synchronized waves, their boots echoing against brick and concrete as if each step were a drumbeat of impending thunder. In that very hour, the city of San Pedro, long accustomed to the low hum of harbor life, became a battlefield. It was not a random raid, but the culmination of a decade-long hunt that had finally closed in on the crown prince of the CJNG, El Mencho. Operation Wipeout, as the operation was codenamed, had been conceived from years of painstaking surveillance, relentless intelligence gathering, and an unyielding determination to cut the veins of a criminal empire that had festered beneath the city's surface. The target was not just a single individual, but an entire network. At the heart lay the Rancho San Pedro Gang, a street organization that had evolved from a local crew in the 1970s into a multi-generational enterprise. This gang was a crucial front for the Mexican Mafia, a prison-based syndicate that had long exerted control over the region. The gang's structure was intricate, divided into 6 distinct subsets, each with its own territory and responsibilities, yet all answering to a higher authority. 2 of those subsets were composed entirely of women, a detail that underscored the breadth and depth of the organization. Each division operated like a separate business unit, but all shared a common revenue stream, a shared hierarchy, and a shared allegiance to a name that resonated far beyond the city limits. The Mexican Mafia demanded taxes from every criminal activity within its territory: drug deals, weapons transfers, even illicit businesses run by local entrepreneurs. In return, the cartel offered a sophisticated framework that granted the street gangs operational legitimacy and coordination that would be impossible for an independent operator. Behind prison walls, the Mexican Mafia exercised a brutal brand of control, dictating strict codes of conduct. Any deviation, tax evasion, encroachment, or disrespect could trigger violent retaliation. Cooperation with law enforcement was a death sentence. For the Rancho San Pedro members, the Mafia was both patron and executioner, a dual role that made loyalty almost a matter of survival. The federal complaint unsealed on the day of the raid detailed how gang members received orders directly from incarcerated leaders. These commands ranged from tax collection to drug distribution strategies, even the allocation of leadership positions within the gang's own ranks. The investigative work that led to Operation Wipeout was exhaustive. Federal agents and local detectives spent years monitoring the gang's movements, recording drug transactions, weapons deals, and violent acts, all while documenting how the money flowed back to incarcerated Mexican Mafia members. They identified the shot callers, the individuals who set the direction for the organization, and the enforcers, the muscle that carried out the Mafia's will. When the raid struck, it targeted the gang's upper tier. In the first hours, authorities swarmed 6 buildings on a single block, each a hub of criminal activity that had become the nerve center of the gang's operations. Police and FBI teams conducted simultaneous knocks, leaving no room for error or escape. They moved with the speed of a well-trained unit, a cadence that only months of rehearsals and simulations could produce. The result was the arrest of 13 individuals, each a decision-maker, each a conduit for the Mexican Mafia's directives. The charges brought against them were severe federal RICO indictments, promising to remove the gang from the streets entirely. The raid yielded significant findings. It revealed that the gang's operations were not merely local. They had become an arm of the Mexican Mafia, a prison-based organization that used the street gang to exert control and coordinate large-scale criminal activity. The gang had received orders on everything from tax collections from other criminals to the arrangement of drug distribution networks to the acquisition and transfer of firearms. These orders were sent through encrypted channels, relayed by trusted couriers, and executed with chilling efficiency. The revelation was a stark illustration of how an ostensibly small street organization could be a linchpin in a far-reaching criminal conspiracy. The federal agents were not merely arresting individuals, they were severing the lifelines that allowed a syndicate to thrive in the city. They were dismantling a network that had been woven through the docks, the markets, and the neighborhoods of San Pedro, exposing a shadowy world that had been hidden beneath everyday life. Police officers on the ground described the night as a blitz, a coordinated onslaught that brought together intelligence, strategy, and sheer force to break the cartel's grip. Their next steps involved dismantling remaining factions, identifying new leaders, and continuing the painstaking work of case building. They vowed that the city would not tolerate such violence again, and that their persistence would continue beyond the arrests. But the raid in San Pedro was only one piece of a larger, more complex puzzle. While the Mexican Mafia and its street gang proxies were severely weakened, the cartel that El Mencho commanded, CJNG, remained a formidable force. El Mencho's rise to power began in the rural landscapes of Mexico, far from the city's docks. Born in Aguila, Maratacan on July 17, 1966, his path to becoming a cartel kingpin began with minor drug convictions and the turbulence of being deported from the United States. These early encounters with the law were the opening chapter of a much longer and bloodier story. Upon returning to Mexico, he aligned himself with the Millennial Cartel, gaining experience and connections within the drug trafficking underworld. Around 2009, he founded the CJNG as a splinter group from the Millennial Organization, a move that would transform the cartel into a hyper-violent, highly sophisticated, transnational criminal organization. Under El Mencho's leadership, the CJNG came to control critical strategic assets. One of the most pivotal was the port of Manzano, a gateway that became a primary entry point for precursor chemicals shipped from China.
Lots of weapons. What is this weapon?
Yeah. It's a 40-millimeter grenade launcher. This is modern warfare. We use war technologies.
These chemicals, essential for the production of methamphetamine and fentanyl, were just the tip of the iceberg. Today, the CJNG operates in all 32 Mexican states and maintains a presence in multiple foreign countries, forming a truly global criminal network. Its product portfolio reads like a catalog of death. Methamphetamine, fentanyl, cocaine, heroin. These flowed across the youth at the Mexican border in staggering quantities. The cartel's synthetic opioids are directly linked to the American opioid epidemic, contributing tens of thousands of overdose deaths annually. Drugs were only one part of El Mencho's empire. The cartel diversified into extortion rackets targeting businesses and agricultural producers, human trafficking operations marked by shocking brutality, and sophisticated financial fraud schemes that moved money through a labyrinth of shell companies and offshore accounts. What made El Mencho particularly dangerous and elusive was his operational style. Unlike flashy cartel leaders who courted media attention, he operated from the shadows, avoiding photographs, public appearances, and even the slightest hint of visibility. His communication channels were encrypted, his couriers trusted, and his movements carefully obscured, making him a ghost in the eyes of law enforcement. The United States government had placed a $15 million bounty on his head, making him one of the most wanted fugitives in the world. Despite this massive reward and the focused efforts of American and Mexican law enforcement agencies, he remained at large. He was a ghost who orchestrated violence and drug trafficking on a massive scale while successfully evading capture year after year. In a city that had always seemed to rely on the myth of the self-made man, El Mencho's story was a stark reminder that the line between economic opportunity and violent crime is thinner than it appears. Back in San Pedro, the aftermath of the raid settled in like dust. Residents peered out of their windows, wondering what would become of their streets. Some felt a sense of relief knowing that the violent criminal networks had been struck down, while others felt uncertainty. Law enforcement officials were clear that this was a victory, but not a definitive end. Their next steps involved dismantling the remaining factions, identifying new leaders, and continuing the painstaking work of case building. The message was one of relentless persistence, a vow that the city would not tolerate such violence again. Operation Wipeout had been a triumph of coordination, intelligence, and sheer force. It was a testament to the power of collaboration between federal and local agencies, a reminder that when the right information is combined with decisive action, even the most entrenched criminal networks can be torn apart. The night was over, but the battle against the shadows that have long lurked beneath San Pedro's harbor was only just beginning. The city's triumph at San Pedro did not simply evaporate the cartel presence. It set a cascade of legal and operational moves in motion, each one tightening the noose around the CJNG's sprawling infrastructure. In February, a quiet yet decisive act in Washington lifted a new weight on El Mencho's empire. The Foreign Narcotics Kingpin Designation Act, now extended to the CJNG, transformed an abstract threat into a concrete target for law enforcement and financial watchdogs alike. With that label, the cartel's name entered a public registry that signals to banks, shipping companies, and even private citizens that the organization is a major player in the drug trade economy. No longer could the CJNG rely on a veneer of legitimacy. Every transaction it attempted to funnel through U.S. channels became a potential trigger for prosecution or seizure. The designation prompted an immediate surge in scrutiny across the nation's banking systems. A landmark indictment rose from the shadowy corners of the cartel's money laundering network. A former banker, once a respected figure in a mid-tier financial institution, was charged with processing millions of dollars through offshore accounts that ultimately funneled capital into the CJNG's coffers. The court documents revealed a sophisticated web of shell corporations, disguised shell banks, and convoluted transfer routes that had for years allowed illicit funds to glide past the borders of legality. The banker's role was not one of a casual intermediary. He acted as a critical node that kept the cartel's logistics humming. By dismantling this node, prosecutors sent a stark message to the cartel's global partners. The channels that once seemed invisible had become illuminated by a new era of transparency. Following the indictment, the Department of Justice turned its attention to the Office of Foreign Assets Control and the Treasury's Office of Terrorism and Financial Intelligence. They moved decisively to freeze accounts linked to the CJNG, cutting off the lifeline that the cartel had built through the financial system. The Asset Control Office seized a string of foreign-based accounts, each one holding vast sums that had been routed through U.S. banks. The freeze was swift, a surgical strike that left the cartel's financial planners scrambling for a new route. As the assets were seized, the cartel's ability to purchase high-tech equipment, weapons, or even the simple tools of a drug production facility came into question. The financial crackdown was not merely an indictment of a banker. It was a broader strategy that sought to cripple the cartel's operational budgets, forcing a slowdown in expansion and a tightening of supply chains. While the financial net tightened, law enforcement forces remained on the ground, honing the logistics that the CJNG had relied on to keep a steady stream of narcotics moving across borders. The capture of Aliano, a senior operative whose deep cover skills had enabled the CJNG to maintain a secure logistics hub, illustrated the relentless push from SWAT teams and Border Patrol units. In the early hours of a rain-slick night, a convoy of armored vehicles rolled onto a derelict warehouse in the outskirts of the city, the building having long been rumored to house one of the cartel's most massive shipments of counterfeit pharmaceuticals. As the operators breached the perimeter, they found a cavernous storage space filled with rows upon rows of sealed containers, each marked with a faint, unmistakable logo. Inside, 5 tons of cocaine, an astounding quantity that would have fueled a month's worth of street distribution, were meticulously packaged in plastic wrap. The raid, coordinated with precision, yielded a staggering number of arrests. Over 200 suspects, ranging from field operatives to senior planners, were taken into custody. The sheer scale of the seizure spoke to the cartel's dependence on bulk distribution to maintain profitability. Every kilogram of cocaine seized meant a cut in the cartel's ability to profit from the high-margin market of synthetic opioids that plagued American communities. The drug's high potency and the prevalence of counterfeit pills had been feeding an epidemic that had already claimed countless lives across the nation. By intercepting large volumes of these substances, law enforcement not only deprived the CJNG of revenue, but also directly reduced the number of lethal pills reaching the streets. The impact was felt in emergency rooms, in families who mourned lost loved ones, and in the quiet acknowledgement that every interdiction, no matter how technical, translated into lives saved.
Against drug cartels. In a memo sent to Congress, the White House saying the U.S. is now in an armed conflict with the narco gangs and labeling their members not just as criminals, but as enemy combatants.
Back in the United States, the federal prosecutors leveraged the kingpin designation to pursue a series of legal actions against banks and money laundering entities. The indictment of the former banker revealed a labyrinthine series of transactions. Millions of dollars were moved through shell companies based in Panama, Belize, and the British Virgin Islands, only to be deposited in accounts that would eventually be transferred to cash and then into the cartel's warehouses. The court documents, stark and unforgiving, painted a picture of an organization that had built a global money laundering apparatus with the precision of a well-timed clock. The revelation that a U.S. bank had unwittingly facilitated the movement of illicit funds sent a clear signal to the cartel's international partners. The era of anonymous transactions had ended. Concurrently, the Office of the Comptroller of the Currency, working with the Treasury, enacted a sweeping freeze on several foreign accounts tied to the CJNG. These freezes cut off a vital artery that the cartel had relied on to move large sums across borders. As the U.S. financial system became increasingly hostile to the CJNG's operations, the cartel's logistical capabilities began to falter. The authorities found themselves with a dual advantage. Not only were they intercepting narcotics on the ground, but they were also dismantling the financial scaffolding that sustained the cartel's reach. While the financial crackdown tightened, the CJNG continued to adapt, seeking new partnerships to maintain their flow of drugs. A significant development emerged when the cartel struck a strategic alliance with the Sinaloa cartel. In the mountains that skirt the border, the two organizations exchanged both protection and opportunity. Sinaloa, known for its mastery of mountain routes and its deep-rooted presence in the highlands, offered the CJNG access to secluded paths that avoided the most heavily monitored crossings. In return, the CJNG supplied Sinaloa with resources, firepower, manpower, and a slice of the lucrative fentanyl and cocaine trade that flowed from the CJNG's warehouses. The partnership was a calculated gamble, demonstrating the cartel's opportunism. It underscored that a single line of attack would not sever the entire beast. Each faction drew on the strengths of the other, ensuring that even as one organization's routes were interdicted, the other could step in to fill the void. The growing pressure on the cartel's logistical routes sparked intense strategic discussions among policymakers, intelligence officials, and the public. A debate emerged in the halls of Washington and Mexico City over how best to pursue the elusive El Mencho. On one side, proponents of precision strikes argued that a drone strike or targeted military operation could deliver a decisive blow, disrupting the cartel's supply chain and creating a powerful deterrent. Jack Riley, a former DEA agent, cautioned that an indiscriminate drone strike might ignite political backlash, violate Mexican sovereignty, and create a martyr for the cartel. He highlighted that such an operation could jeopardize the delicate partnership that had been forged between the two nations over the last decade, potentially undermining future collaborative efforts. Opposing this view were advocates of a measured, methodical approach that favored bilateral cooperation, incremental arrests, and sustained interdiction efforts. They pointed to the evidence. Every kilogram of seized fentanyl meant fewer pills on the streets, fewer overdoses, and a tangible reduction in the cartel's market. The slow, persistent strategy, they argued, built a foundation of accountability and strengthened institutional frameworks that would last beyond the immediate threat. The diplomatic standoff in Washington grew louder as Mexican officials, wary of a unilateral strike, issued stern warnings against violating their sovereignty. They stressed that a drone strike could be perceived as a breach of international law, potentially sparking retaliation and jeopardizing the cooperation that had been key to recent successes. In the end, the decision did not rest on a single option. It was a culmination of multiple fronts. The federal agencies, buoyed by the Kingpin Act designation, moved forward with a series of legal prosecutions. The indictment of the former banker served as a blueprint for how financial transparency could undermine the cartel's ability to fund operations. Meanwhile, the freeze of accounts by the Office of Foreign Assets Control sent a chilling message to the cartel's global partners. As the United States and Mexico grappled with the diplomatic implications, the focus sharpened on the ultimate prize, El Mencho himself. The saga of the San Pedro warehouse raid, therefore, is more than a tale of 200-plus arrests and 5 tons of cocaine. It is a narrative of how a coordinated legal and operational framework can adapt to a shadowy, ever-evolving threat. The Kingpin designation, the financial crackdown, and the ongoing interdiction of narcotics all intertwine to depict a broader picture of how the fight against the CJNG is both a domestic public health crisis and an international law enforcement battle. From the perspective of the communities that bear the brunt of this crisis, the impact is palpable. Families across the border mourn the loss of loved ones to the opioid epidemic, while city officials reflect on the legacy of fear that the cartel cultivated. Yet the relentless pursuit by SWAT teams, DEA agents, and federal prosecutors offers a glimmer of hope. Each interdiction, each legal proceeding sends a ripple across the supply chain, cutting off the drugs that once flooded American streets and the profits that funded a multinational criminal organization. The story of the Rancho San Pedro gangs and their reign over San Pedro is a microcosm of a larger national picture. The narrative demonstrates that coordinated effort, whether through precision strikes, financial sanctions, or legal indictments, can make a measurable difference. As border crossings tighten, interdiction operations expand, and the courts prosecute those who enable the cartel's operations, the trajectory points toward a future where the CJNG's shadow grows thinner. The city's decisive step forward is not an endpoint, but a turning point, a moment where the law adapts to a threat that is always one step ahead. In that relentless dance between law enforcement and the cartel, the momentum built after the San Pedro raid continues to push forward, reshaping the landscape and redefining what it means to bring an elusive criminal leader to justice. The story of the Rancho San Pedro gangs and their reign over San Pedro is a microcosm of a larger national picture. The narrative demonstrates that coordinated effort, whether through precision strikes, financial sanctions, or legal indictments, can make a measurable difference. As border crossings tighten, interdiction operations expand, and the courts prosecute those who enable the cartel's operations, the trajectory points toward a future where the CJNG's shadow grows thinner. The city's decisive step forward is not an endpoint, but a turning point. A moment where the law adapts to a threat that is always one step ahead. In that relentless dance between law enforcement and the cartel, the momentum built after the San Pedro raid continues to push forward, reshaping the landscape and redefining what it means to bring an elusive criminal leader to justice.